Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Sandy. I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. As you know, work from home has massively increased from the last few months. People are handling sensitive data on their devices issued, companies issued, or personal devices, which are connected to their home network. We also know home networks are not as secure as their corporate networks and easier to hack into. So my question is, what can people do to keep their and their company's data safe and secure?
Okay, well, what we're going to do through this small slide set that I've produced for yourselves is cover the topic of home working, managing cyber risk, and this is guidance from the National Cyber Security. So this is going to be a high-level overview of the advice that they provide. We're going to be looking at one infographic specifically about working from home, which has 5 points, and then from that we'll go through each individual point in a little bit more detail. After that, we'll then talk about what constitutes a suspicious email, or text or message, and then from that, how folk can report such to the National Cyber Security Centre. And then following that, we'll then go back into the NCSC, National Cyber Security Centre, look at some of the online documents that companies, businesses can download for free, which will help them manage the risks more effectively or look at issues they haven't considered. And then finally, we'll look at reiterating how to report incidents to fraud and cyber incidents to action fraud. And then finally, touching on if you're a sole trader and you manage your own IT, just a few things for you to consider with regards to if something happened. And then part of the documents that we will be looking at is not just looking at working from home, we're talking about small business guide, how you can video conference, which is going to be available, but also managing risks and do you have a response and recovery. So there'll be a lot more context that people can look at after the presentation. This presentation is obviously for me to use for yourselves. However, when your viewers look at it, they will be advised on the home screen. As you can see now, it will say this is best viewed with the note screen available, because there is additional information and links to where your clients can gain additional information from the NCSC. So what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to move on just to a sort of catch statement, which I'll let folk read in their own time. And this was pushed out by the NCSC right at the beginning of the COVID lockdown period, because it was sort of fairly obvious that folk would be having concerns about coronavirus as well, about trusted sources. So the links, which I will provide in the notes, are there for Public Health England and the NHS, and then specific guidance, which we will cover, looking at dealing with suspicious messages. So hopefully by now people would have read that, and I don't proceed to go any further into that. The next slide, this is an infographic, and this is, if you've not seen these before, this is the type of style of infographic that the NCSC make available all the time. And there will be links on the last page as to where you can go and get access to alerts and advisories, where you can download these types of documents from. And the reason that we use the NCSC as the source is A, that it is the most viable and trusted source for cyber protection information, but also it takes away the onus on the forces, that's the police forces, writing their own content, because now we're speaking to a national message. I am one of 43 cyber protection officers, at least across the United Kingdom, working on each force area. Then we have our colleagues in the regions, or the regional organised crime units, working with the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, Action Fraud, NCSC, etc. So this slide just sets up in easy chunks as to what people need to consider. So on the left-hand side where it said spotting email scams linked to COVID-19, we'll cover that later, but we're now going to go through each of the 1 to 5 points in a little bit more detail. So the first one is about your staff working from home, and the bold letters is really the area that company bosses, IT systems should have these things in mind. So if you're going to set up access and new accounts, then you need to make sure that they use strong passwords. Now, to some people, that's blatantly obvious, but to others, it's not. And unfortunately, if we just look at what I look at on a weekly basis, because I'm tasked to look at cyber-dependent crime victims, probably at the minute, 7 out of 10 of the people I speak to are on a weekly basis, be they a business or individual home user, they've not used a strong password. And they have not used a strong and separate password across all their accounts, be it email and social media. So there will be advice in the information I give out at the end of the session about passwords, how to do that. But also the National Cybersecurity Centre also strongly recommend two-factor authentication. That's another means by which you can secure your email or your account that we're looking at. And in terms of passwords, the advice is 3 random words to generate a strong, secure password. But if we're looking at businesses, it's probably more applicable for them to use password managers. And there is advice on the NCSC website about password managers. Me personally, I use a password manager. I don't rely on myself to create random 3 random word passwords. I just can't do it. I haven't got enough time and I wouldn't remember them. So for me, a password manager is far better to do that. We will, and point 2 continuing, the video telephone communications conferencing, there's a separate document about that, and the NCSC put out advice all the time. So it's always wise that people go and check on that. And then also, if you're going to deploy as a company software as a service, then the NCSC can help you with regard to that. Because if you've got large amount of users using new technology, etc., then you've got to make sure all these devices are updated on a regular basis. We won't touch on bring your own devices, but there is advice within the context of today within that. Moving on then to controlling access to corporate systems. You mentioned about people using their Wi-Fi router, etc. Yes, that's right. They probably are less secure than a company system, but that's not to say that businesses can't allow their staff to connect to their router. What you need to do, I think, the basic thing we'll do is make sure you change the default password to your router, perhaps rename it, and certainly change the administrator password. So what you're doing, you're limiting the opportunity for someone to gain access to that router. But you would hope also, as you read through, that companies or staff are using a virtual private network. And this is a means by which you have a secure digital connection between the device and the network that you're connecting to, and that is encrypted, and therefore technically nobody should be able to gain access to that. It would be wrong of me to lead people on and think, well, VPNs are all secure. Most of the time they are, but the NCSC do acknowledge there is some vulnerabilities in VPNs, hence why it's annotated there. Do please refer to the NCSC's guidance on virtual private networks. Then looking at staff, looking at after the device. If you're issued with a new device, you obviously got to get familiar with that, and you would be told how to use it, etc. But some of the things that aren't sort of covered by companies, because the company would expect their member staff to deal with it effectively themselves, is don't allow your child or your partner to gain access to your device. Because technically you could be breaking the law in terms of data protection regulations, but also they may do something inadvertently or for a bit of a laugh, and actually fact now they're committing computer misuse offences as well, albeit unwittingly they have, because they've accessed something that they shouldn't be accessing. Moving on, again, it's fairly common sense, but if you do have a burglar at your house, please report it to the police first of all, but make sure you tell your employer. Your employer should have set up certain things with regard to your device, that it should be password protected, it should be encrypted, and certainly with Windows 10, with the Pro editions, you can set up encryption, and your company IT should be able to do that. But if people don't know how to do that, and maybe they're a sole trader, there is lots of ample advice on the Microsoft or the Mac websites looking at the enterprise versions so that people can actually set up their devices to be encrypted. So your data that you have got to be secure at rest, which it is because it's obviously where it is. But if you move it around, that device also needs to be encrypted as well, so that if anybody picked it up and found it, they wouldn't be able to gain the access straight in. And ensure that your staff make sure that their devices are kept up to date. Now, I'd like to think that that should be automated, but not all companies do that. Today, I've posted on our Twitter feed that those people who use Microsoft products need to make sure that their systems are updated, because Patch Tuesday was yesterday. Clearly, we're behind the curve slightly in terms of time, but I knew that it would be there today. So I think there's 120 odd vulnerabilities that Microsoft have found. Now, that's not to say that the system is bad or not fit for purpose, far from it, but offenders, that's online criminals, are there to looking to exploit vulnerabilities in operating systems. That's why it's critical that all devices should be kept up to date. Number 5, again, to those who work in the IT business, fairly common sense, but you shouldn't be using removable media on a device that the company has provided unless you are authorized to do that. Because that's what you're doing, you're limiting the opportunity for somebody to, say, go to an event in the pre-COVID, pick up a nice flashy USB drive that says all this company information, or they find something in the street and it says, and a little tag next to it, if lost, please push into your computer and it will give you the address and you can contact us. No, you shouldn't be doing that. Please just don't do that. If you have to use USBs, then make sure they're all locked down and that you have a process in place by which it sweeps and scans that device area so that nothing can come in. There's also national cybersecurity guidance on removable media, and also avoid bringing your own devices as well, because that's critical as well, especially if you're connecting your own device to the company network. What are you taking out of that company network? What are you technically putting into it? May you be compromising it? So again, it's a far bigger picture that unfortunately companies and people need to think about before they move forward into home working. We touched on earlier about spotting suspicious messages. Here are just a few, not exclusively, a few of the reasons or what offenders will use to try and trick you into doing something that you wouldn't normally do. And it usually starts off with authority, telling you to do something, or asking you to do something, or pretending to be whoever they are. Please review it. If you're in the individual world, there's a initiative called Take 5 that is run in conjunction with CFAS, Action Fraud, the financial services system, whereby if you get a suspicious email and it says, for example, HMRC, you owe us £15,000. If you don't pay us by, it's time's critical now, pay us by say 6 p.m. today, the HMRC will be sending around the police tomorrow morning, knocking your door and coming to arrest you. And that is the means by which people try and get people to do something they wouldn't normally do. So think about it. The urgency. You are told you have a time limited window to do things. Please don't engage with that. Is it using emotion to get you to do something, make you panic, fearful, curious, or whatever? Scarcity is the message offering you something that's in short supply. So topically today, what we're going to see lots of offenders trying to dupe people into buying face masks. Why? Because on the 24th of July, everybody who goes into a shop will have to wear a face mask. So I bet all the online retailers and sellers would have been really busy last night with the public buying up stock. And if you work for a company, they probably will be looking for stock. So they could be targeted through email or phone or text saying, look, we can offer you X and Y and Z, but in fact, there's nothing there. So they're trying to get your money, or they're trying to gain access to your system by getting you to click on a link, etc., etc. And current events, are you expect to see a message like this? Criminals often exploit current news stories, and we just highlighted on that. The next thing people need to be aware of, which we covered in our session we did a couple of weeks ago looking at consumers, is Okay, you've received a suspicious email. What are you going to do about it? Up until April, people could have reported phishing attempts to action fraud. But now the National Cybersecurity Centre, since that data taken on, it's called the Suspicious Email Reporting Service. You can see with the graphic there, the email address where people send it off to. And on the right-hand side, I've written down what the NCSC will do and will not do. And I put that there in plain sight so that people have their expectations met and they understand the expectation. Because in the past, law enforcement's being criticised, sometimes without really much justification, that we do not pass information back to the public. Sometimes we do, in terms of they've made us aware of information, etc., or some online crime or crime committing, but sometimes we can't go back and tell the people. So this is what the NCSC, they are unable to inform you of the outcome of its review, but they can confirm that they do act on every message received. And last week, the NCSC pushed out saying that within the last 2 months, they've dealt with nearly 1 million suspicious reports to that new system, which I think is outstanding. And that just shows how important the public value is, but also how much the National Cybersecurity value it and law enforcement. Then this slide here just talks about some of the infographics that you will be able to download and see. And so starting with the left-hand side, there's a small business guide. And there is also a fact sheet to go with that, so you make sure you go through your check sheet, so you do that. Then moving to the right, small business guide, how you prepare and how you deal with an incident. That's critical as well to your business continuity plans. Bottom left-hand corner, looking about viruses and malware. Using your antivirus products, making sure you keep all your IT up to date, and making sure you only download apps or programs from the official stores. Please don't jailbreak your devices, download from third-party apps suppliers, because chances are they're going to be corrupted with malware. And then finally, on the right-hand side, looking at video conferencing. This is a relatively new infographic, so they've been out probably about 2 months, because since COVID came in sort of mid-March time, a lot of businesses have moved to video conferencing. The next slide looks at reiterating, obviously because some people may have listened to the session we did a few weeks ago, how to report incidents of cyber and fraud to action fraud. One caveat with regard to fraud: if you are a company or an individual and you are a victim of a fraud, not cyber, but fraud, and you know who the offender is and they reside in the area where you live, you need to contact 101. Every other incident, you've got to go through action fraud. And then finally, on the right-hand side, if you manage your own IT, you need to be thinking about an incident plan, which will mean all of these, at least 5 points that are mentioned on the slide there. So again, you need to be, if you've never done this before, go back, look at all the advice we've provided today, where you can go and get advice, go through it. And I would suggest that if you're a sole trader and you know nothing about IT, find someone that you trust and speak to them. You may have to pay a retainer for them to do the work for you, but make sure you get advice, and just don't think, if you don't know anything about IT, you can set up on your own reconnaissance, because that's probably not going to be the case, and there may be vulnerabilities in you doing that. So at least get someone you trust to make sure it's set up correctly. And then finally, the last slide is how individuals or businesses can contact us, the Cyber Protect team. We have a dedicated Twitter feed, which you can see there. And then in terms of the links, again, this will be on the slides that I produced to you, Sandeep, for your clients at the end of the session, where you can go get alerts and advisories, where you can go and get information about what's today's topic, homeworking, the weekly cyber threat report, which comes out every Friday, how they can sign up for Thames Valley Alerts. And the Thames Valley Alerts are information we get from the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau or Action Fraud on a national or regional force level, and which is pushed out through Thames Valley Alerts, which TVP run. Or you can also sign up for the national alerts through Action Fraud, and those are just one of at least 4 ways that people can keep up to date. So hopefully that very quick run through of what we've covered will be of interest. And again, when your clients look at this as part of the package that you're going to deliver, please look at it with the notes page open so you can see where the links to other information is. It may be either you click on it and go straight to it, or you'll copy and paste it into your web browser. So hopefully that very quick high level overview about working from home will help your clients.
That's great, Mark. Thanks for sharing that information. I'm sure our viewers will find it useful.
Okay, you're welcome.